Good evening. Thank you for attending this presentation about the study of whether situational leadership impacts volunteerism commitment within the organized church. In this presentation, I'm going to share my personal motivation for this study. I'll provide a brief explanation of situational leadership. We'll talk about the need for a strong volunteer network, describe the research method used in this study, discuss the results and findings from each element, describe the overall research conclusion, and then end with a brief description of considerations for a possible extension of this study. I'll begin with an explanation of why I chose to study whether volunteerism commitment is impacted by the practice of situational leadership. I've served on the Board of Administration within my local church for the past 20 plus years, and now for the past 3 years I've served on the Board of Administration for the Greater Ohio District of the Wesleyan Church. While serving on the local board, I've experienced times of great enthusiasm and commitment among its volunteers, and periods where volunteerism commitment was flat, doing just enough to maintain a comfortable or satisfactory level of service and fellowship. While working at the district level, I've observed and heard stories about thriving, healthy churches that were making a measurable impact in their communities. I've also heard about churches that were struggling to maintain their basic operational obligations. For years, I have believed that effective leadership would be a driving factor in the overall health of a church and its ability to share the gospel and disciple followers of Jesus Christ to grow in a spiritual holiness. Studies conducted in church leadership have indicated that lead pastors are expected to fulfill complex leadership roles, similar to those in secular institutions. In other words, church leadership is no less complex, no less important, and possesses as many dynamics as leadership does or as leadership roles in other areas of industry and service. I couldn't help but posit that situational leadership, properly practiced, could become the tool a lead pastor needs to engage volunteers to become active, healthy contributors to the completion of the church mission and purpose. Situational leadership, as illustrated and also presented by Blanchard and Cohen, has certain built-in assumptions about both leaders and followers. First, not all followers are equal. Each follower possesses a mixture of competence and commitment that form the follower's capability and commitment to perform a designated role, whether they're being paid or whether they're volunteering. Second, leaders cannot utilize a singular approach. There is no one-size-fits-all mentality regarding their approach to leading those within their sphere of responsibility and influence. Instead, according to situational leadership theory, followers can be identified by the leader as exhibiting characteristics of one out of 4 combinations of competence and commitment. For each of the 4 possible follower combinations, there is a corresponding leadership approach that can be used to help develop a follower and cultivate a high degree of contribution and output. For example, followers who are highly competent to perform a task or fulfill the requirements of a job, but who struggle to be committed and engaged, may need very little job-related direction, but they may benefit from leader support and encouragement to become more engaged, enthusiastic, and productive. So I asked, if the theory of situational leadership approach could be validated in an environment where employees are paid for their services, could it also be useful for helping volunteers become more engaged, competent, and committed to help a church meet its objectives and serve the community? The formal research questions for this study are: will situational leadership be an effective leadership style within an organized church context? And does the practice of situational leadership correlate to volunteer commitment within the church realm? A mixed method research approach was used to facilitate the collection of data and information to help answer each of these questions. An online survey was presented to 88 Wesleyan pastors in Ohio. Personal interviews were conducted with 4 pastors of evangelical churches in north central Ohio, and a third data point was constructed through an analysis of church websites of the same 4 pastors who were interviewed. First, let's start with a quantitative survey review. 32% of the 88 Wesleyan pastors surveyed completed the online survey. The survey contained basic demographic questions regarding age, employment status, and education. Additional demographic questions included years as a pastor, number of paid direct reports, number of board members, and average Sunday service attendance. The survey contained 12 survey item statements. 11 of which were Likert scale response questions designed to generate an understanding of the survey participants' expectations regarding volunteerism commitment and whether the leader practiced the characteristics of situational leadership. The final question asked that the lead pastor indicate the number of hours per week the average board member participated in volunteer work within the church. The qualitative study was comprised of a personal interview with 4 pastors from evangelical churches in Richland County, Ohio. The pastors were contacted via telephone and asked to participate in the interview process. 8 pastors were initially contacted, but only 4 were able to arrange a meeting prior to the deadline for completion of the interview process. The interview process consisted of 5 questions regarding the competence and commitment levels of the church board members and the efforts of that senior pastor to improve both competence and commitment of those volunteers. The third data point used in the research was an analysis of the church websites of the pastors interviewed for the qualitative portion of the study. Each website was reviewed to calculate the total observations of words and inferences to volunteer participation within the completion of the local church mission. Quantitative data indicated congruence with situational leadership among the leaders responded, and here's how. 93% of those that responded to the survey questions said they at least somewhat agreed that they assess a situation with a follower or a volunteer and adapt their leadership style to meet the needs of that situation. 78% of those respondents said they at least somewhat agree that they monitor the commitment level of the board members to determine whether they should intervene in some way to help address commitment or competence levels. And of those that responded, 100% said that they at least somewhat agree that when they are concerned about a board member's level of commitment, they seek to understand the cause of that diminishing commitment. However, the congruence between leaders and situational leadership did not indicate a statistically significant correlation between situational leadership and volunteerism commitment. The interviewers, or the interviewees, however, during the qualitative study, seemed intrigued by the questions they were asked. They gave serious consideration and thought to their answers, sometimes even sharing in-depth response examples about volunteer competence and commitment. Some interviewees were able to share resources and tools that they were using to address current leadership issues within their church. Other interviewees seemed to use the interview process as an opportunity to think out loud about some of the leadership challenges and opportunities they were facing. A careful review through the construction of a qualitative data coding matrix indicated the existence of as many as 3 different coding formats for the interview results. Those formats were descriptive, in vivo, and causation. The matrix indicated that among the responses of 4 senior pastors to 5 questions, 12 responses were coded causation, making this the dominant code. The matrix was revised with the addition of a column titled Researcher Explanations, and the information in the questions column was revised to indicate the focus of the question instead of simply ordering the questions. As a result of the matrix revision, it became evident that competence and commitment of volunteers in the church realm is believed to be motivated through relational dynamics that exist between the senior pastor and the volunteers, inclusive of an understanding of the volunteer's personal calling in areas of church ministry. The identified descriptive and causation codes reflected the interviewee's explanation of the importance of speaking to a volunteer using a communication style that the volunteer understands, even when it's hard for the leader to adapt to a communication style different from his or her dominant or natural style. Leaders repeatedly explained the need to help volunteers understand their personal call in areas of ministry. The belief was that a volunteer who understands his or her unique call from God to serve in ministry would become more committed and more competent to live out the call and allow God to move them from one great experience to the next. Because the interviewees often answered the exact same question in various ways, the results provided a holistic picture of competence and commitment among members of the local church volunteer boards. One participant explained that the relational component of his leadership practice and teaching was like the need to breathe together with his followers so they could walk through a situation with a greater hope and promise of achieving a calling or direction from God in and upon their lives. The study exemplified the depth of relational connection that would help a leader properly assess a follower's competence and commitment. Third data point findings revealed an emphasis on all websites regarding church presence in the community, as well as logistics, geographic location, service times, calendars of events, mission statements, and foundational beliefs. The church with the second most inferences and references to volunteerism as a significant component of church life and purpose used their website to drive people to an understanding of community connections and service to others, significantly more than did the other websites. I must say that while it was disappointing to not discover a statistically significant correlation between spiritual leadership and volunteerism commitment, the study did provide rich explanations about the need for, the presence, and the significance of relational connections between leaders and followers. In this study, or if this study were to be extended, it should include the use of proven leadership instruments, or at least a proven leadership instrument, to determine whether senior pastors are truly employing situational leadership methods. Another enhancement to the study would be to interview and survey the volunteer board members to better understand whether and how the leadership style of the senior pastor correlates with their personal degree of volunteerism commitment. Finally, questions asked of the senior pastor should more directly probe into the presence of the four leadership styles associated with situational leadership, those being directing, coaching, supporting, and delegating. In closing, clearly volunteers are needed to help nonprofit organizations achieve their purpose and their mission of helping improve the quality of life for people within their scope of influence. There's nothing worse than a disengaged employee that you are paying to perform a service, except a disengaged volunteer who cannot be motivated with the means of compensation, but instead must be inspired through alignment of their personal calling and gifting with the mission and opportunities presented by the organization. I'd like to thank you for your time and your participation, and I do look forward to your questions and your comments. Thank you.